Good evening, and welcome to the National Weather Service live discussion on hurricane season 2015. I'm pleased to be joined by meteorologist Donovan Landreneau and warning coordination meteorologist Roger Erickson. They will be providing some very good information this evening on hurricane season 2015, as well as some good preparedness information. We also will have Q&A, question and answers, because many of us are obviously going to have a lot of questions on what to do, what does this season mean, what does the outlook mean. So I'm going to hand it off now to meteorologist Donovan Landreneau, who will be discussing the 2015 hurricane outlook.
Good evening. The official NOAA hurricane outlook came out yesterday, May 27th. And if we get to the slide, official forecast is calling for 6 to 11 named storms, of which 3 to 6 will become hurricanes and 0 to 2 becoming major hurricanes. So pretty much they're expecting a below average season, but I would like to stress on the importance of not totally focusing on these numbers. We have to prepare each and every hurricane season as if that very one storm will hit our area. And such seasons that were below normal in the past that has caused a lot of destruction were 1992, when we had Hurricane Andrew hit South Florida and went across the Gulf and hit Southwest Louisiana, specifically South Central Louisiana in St. Mary Parish. Another year of note was 1983 that had only 4 named storms, but one of those storms was named Alicia, and it was a Cat 3 in Galveston. So I would like to lead on to the way of different preparedness guides that we produced here at the Lake Charles National Weather Service office. Before that, go back to the El Nino chart. Here's one of the major reasons why they're predicting a below normal average season, and this is the El Nino that has been in persistence pretty much on and off for most of the year, but in the last 2 months it has intensified to a weak El Nino, and the possibility it could strengthen to a moderate El Nino. And pretty much what that does is disrupting the worldwide weather patterns, and this is pretty much what has helped our severe weather season in April and May. And what this could do is enhance the winds across the deep tropical Atlantic and shear off most systems. But that's not to say that some of these systems could develop in the Western Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico, where it remains above normal water temperatures. So if we go to our segment on the hurricane guide, we've produced 2 separate guides here at the National Weather Service office. One, the Texas Hurricane Guide, has been a part for the last 10 years and is collaboration between the 4 Texas weather offices and here in Lake Charles. They have funding for this guide, and we all put our input, and we produce a pretty good guide, and it's have actual distribution copies at most of the Walmarts in Texas. And I think they produced about 1 million guides this year. But we wanted something for Louisiana as well. So we had a hurricane guide. The last one we made for our office was in 2010. But with the anniversary of Rita and Katrina, we wanted to redo this guide. And I want to take a little bit of time to show you the different pages of the Southwest Louisiana Hurricane Guide. And of course, that is the cover, but there's a introduction letter by our meteorologist in charge, Andy Patrick. But basically what we talk about is mainly about the hurricane and the hurricane history. Since 1851, we've had about 55 hurricanes hit the state of Louisiana. And if you do the numbers, that's 1 hurricane every 3 years. But the next section is we're going to talk about storm surge. This year, we're going to be issuing a new storm surge product graphic, and it's going to be issued by the National Hurricane Center. It's going to basically highlight the different areas where storm surge watch and warning is possible. And of course, if you look at these maps, these possible inundation maps, we are probably the most susceptible in the entire country for storm surge. And this has already been proven in past storms such as Rita and Ike. And the guide also highlights inland flooding, which could be a very major problem. We've already seen a couple of instances where severe inland flooding in both Tropical Storm Allison in June '89 and 2001, where we had anywhere from 15 to 30 inches of rain. Tornadoes is always an issue with landfalling hurricanes. And another instance we've seen with this was Hurricane Gustav in 2008, where we had a pretty good tornado outbreak across central Louisiana. The guide also goes with destructive winds. Right there is pretty much a picture of Highway 14 after the aftermath of Hurricane Rita. But the guide also shows how you can prepare, your such as garage doors. And next page. And got a page on preparing special needs and pets. Next page. And tips, just general checklist to do right before you would evacuate for a hurricane. Next page. And one page highlighting the hurricane history we've had across southwest Louisiana. And that is a picture of the hurricane tracking chart and the hurricane forecast. And this year we put a story on the 10-year anniversary of Hurricane Rita. And we have rip current and safety and evacuation maps. And one page showing what our web page is and all the addresses and contacts that will be available. And of course, tips on returning home. All of these guides are available on our homepage. It's on the banner that you can see pretty quickly. You can get this information on the Lake Charles weather homepage, on the Tropical webpage, and the webpage highlighting.
Thanks, Donovan, for giving us an update on the seasonal forecast. And I got a slideshow here that I've been doing, talking to different officials across Southwest Louisiana, Southeast Texas, preparing everyone for the upcoming hurricane season. So we're going to get my slideshow up and running here. You know, 2015 is the 10-year anniversary of Hurricane Rita, and probably many of you out there on the internet were here in Southwest Louisiana, Southeast Texas, or South Central Louisiana, experiencing the full effects of a Category 3 hurricane making landfall. This picture that we got on the opening slide here is just a radar shot of the hurricane as it was making landfall in Southwest Louisiana, just over the state line in Louisiana from Texas, making landfall in Johnson Bayou. There was probably, I want to say 15 or 16 of us here in the office with 100+ mile winds howling outside. It was quite the experience to go through. So we're going to start off our slideshow here with a little pop quiz. And of course, I can't see you, but you can all see me. So, you know, my opening question is, what are the 4 main weather hazards associated with hurricanes? I got 4 pictures here for you to probably help us out with what we're talking about. And the first picture is a picture of some windstorm damage. Hurricanes can produce very strong winds that produce all sorts of damage to people's property and homes, businesses. Second picture is rainfall. A lot of rainfall can occur with not even hurricanes. It can be tropical storms. We've had events with Tropical Storm Allison locally in 1989, as well as a repeat in 2001, where we saw devastating flash flooding from freshwater flooding associated with tropical systems. Third picture is a picture of downtown Cameron after the effects of Hurricane Rita from the storm surge, just the big wall of water as it comes in off the Gulf of Mexico. And like Donovan was alluding to earlier in our brochure, we have a very susceptible coastline where the storm surge can go more than 20 or even 30 miles inland in some scenarios. And finally, the last threat associated with hurricanes is tornadoes. And so we're going to very briefly go over each of these. The first one is, of course, hurricane winds. You know, anytime we have a hurricane out there, we're going to be having a hurricane watch in effect up to 48 hours in advance before the storm is making landfall, and will be upgraded to a hurricane warning within 36 hours of landfall. And so when we see a hurricane warning, we're talking about wind speeds of 74-mile winds or stronger. And of course, depending on the category of the hurricane, the more devastating the damage can be. So category 1, some types of damage from the National Hurricane Center website talks about a few trees down, roof damage, power outages that may last for days, versus a category 3, 111 to 129 mile an hour winds, many trees down, roof removal possible, power outages lasting for weeks. And for those of us that were around here for Hurricane Rita, as well as our friends in Southeast Louisiana that went through Hurricane Katrina, as well as in Mississippi, we lost power outages 4 weeks after those hurricanes. And so something to be planning for in the event of a large storm. That's the kind of scenario that we're going to be looking at. The worse you get up on the wind scale, of course, the more significant damage and the longer the effects. Category 5, reminds me of '92, where we had Hurricane Andrew making landfall in South Florida, and they had to create tent cities south of Miami for people down there that didn't have a home to go back to. And so we haven't seen an event like that, fortunately, in a long, long time. So from the wind perspective, one of the things that we do in the National Weather Service is after a tornado or after any high wind event is we try to rate how strong the wind speeds were associated with this storm. And so here's just a few examples of what maybe we would be seeing as we go out into communities and look at some of the damage. And so, for instance, here's a picture of a tree that was uprooted during Hurricane Rita. We have worked with wind engineers to determine what kind of wind speed would that cause, would cause that kind of damage. And the range for a tree uprooted is between 76 and 118 miles an hour. Compare that up here to the top right picture. It's a picture of a business over in Orange, Texas with a partial roof loss. Partial roof loss indicates wind speeds anywhere from 83 to 120 miles an hour. And then a picture on the bottom right here, this is a picture of a telephone pole that was snapped off during this Hurricane Rita. Wind speeds that could cause that kind of damage are rated anywhere between 98 and 142 miles an hour. The second event that we always talk about during tropical systems is the rainfall threat, flash flooding threat. And the good news with Hurricane Rita was that because Rita was moving rather rapidly, because the backside of Rita did not have a large swath of rain, we ended up with relatively small numbers, relatively speaking, for a tropical system. So on this map here that we're looking at, Lake Charles radar being situated as a little black dot in the picture, the red indicates areas where they saw at least 5 inches of rain associated with Hurricane Rita. So many areas from Beaumont to Lake Charles, all the way over to Jennings, Crowley, rain area, that's where the extent of 5 inches of rain occurred with this tropical system, and it extended very far inland, all the way up towards almost Alexandria in Louisiana. In Texas, it extended well past our region of responsibility, past the Jasper-Newton area, and went even further north than that, up the Sabine River. So, in fact, there's even a few spots here in this pink-purple shade, where we actually had rain totals much higher than 5 inches, closer to 10 inches of rain in parts of Jasper County and Tower County. The important thing to be aware of when it comes to flash floods, and we've had a lot of events in Texas, Louisiana recently, and Oklahoma as well, where we've had a lot of freshwater flooding from the storms this spring. And so it's important at any time of the year to know what your flash flood risk is. And so FEMA has created maps out there that show 100-year floodplain areas. And so this is just an example over in Southeast Texas. I guess all you do is you just search for it on the internet. You can find these maps for your local area. Just look up FEMA flood maps and you can find the maps for your local area. And these different color codes indicate what kind of threat zone you actually live in from the perspective of floods. And it's also important because this might be kind of a kickstart to kind of think about and consider whether or not you actually need to get flood insurance from the perspective of heavy rains. And like I said, with all the events that we've had from the Houston area out towards Austin, San Antonio, up in Oklahoma, we've had a lot of big flood events in the last couple of weeks. The kind of stories of things where you would hope people would have flood insurance, so that when these kind of events happen, they'll be well protected. Here's a couple of shots of an example of a flash flood that we had last year, not even associated with a tropical system, just a heavy rainmaker over in Beaumont, Texas. A couple of streets, I should say the highway over there near Lamar University, that got flooded out. And this is an underpass, a very common place that we worry about for motorists, where they sometimes cannot tell how deep the water is, and they inadvertently drive into water that might be even above the roof, or excuse me, the hood of the car. The picture on the bottom right, you can see the water is up to the windshield level of the car in this picture here. Fortunately for this flood event here for us locally, it was a good story, and the fact that no one was seriously injured or killed in these events. All right, so the next thing I wanted to show you here is just an example of our storm surge scenarios. And so I've got a couple different graphics here for category 1 through category 5 to kind of give you an idea of what the threat zone is from the perspective of the salt water being pushed in from the Gulf of Mexico and how far inland that can actually go. These maps are actually available on our website at the listing of the website listed below here, weather.gov/LCH. When you go to our website, there's a link called Tropical Weather on the left side column. Click on that. And on that web page, our tropical page, there'll be a link on the left side column there that's called Storm Surge. And so click on that Storm Surge link, and it's actually an atlas for the entire United States that you can zoom in on and see what the risk from a category 1 all the way up to a category 5 storm surge zone would be for your local area. So what I did here, just zoomed it on into Southwest Louisiana to the Lake Charles area, showing what potentially could flood from a category 1 hurricane. And so the color codes on here, the blue shading indicates up to 3 feet of water above ground level. One of the things that we've had problems with in the past is when we talk about storm surge, we'll be referencing mean sea level. And reality is many people don't know what the height of their business or their home is in relation to sea level, especially all the way up here to the I-10 corridor from Beaumont, Lake Charles area. And so this graphic kind of takes that part of the mystery out of the equation. So the values that we're looking at on here are going to be showing you values of the water level above ground level. And these are what we would consider worst case scenarios. This is not going to happen for every category 1 hurricane. This is kind of a compilation of every possible scenario of a category 1 hurricane. And these values are just showing you the problem areas associated with the storm surge. This does not include areas that are going to be flooding from just the rainfall events that can also come along with a tropical system. So that's category 1. And look at the jump up to a category 2. The map changes quite dramatically. Now we got different colors on the map. The yellow indicates water greater than 3 feet above ground level. The orange indicates water greater than 6 feet above level. And you look south of Lake Charles down towards the Cameron Parish line, you start seeing areas with water greater than 9 feet above ground level. Now, the reason for that is just because it's so easy to push water inland up the big Calcasieu River coming into Southwest Louisiana that drains down to Cameron. The water just basically flows, backs up all the way from the Gulf of Mexico and can inundate that far inland. And so it's kind of interesting. This is just a category 2 worst case scenario. And you see the different bayous across the Lake Charles area, Westlake area, and even Sulphur. Bayou Din, south of Sulphur, how deep the water can back up, even in that area, which is a very industrialized area of Southwest Louisiana, could have some significant flooding along Bayou Din, and it's going to be causing issues for over there. Let me go to the next slide and show you a category 3. And it's dramatic how much deeper the water gets, just going from a category 1 to 2, and then even more so from a category 2 to category 3. So once again, this is not going to be a scenario that you're going to see in an individual hurricane category 3. This is the worst case scenario of multiple category 3 landfalling storms. And so we see big numbers all across the area. Large sections of Lake Charles, anywhere from 3 to over 6 feet of water above ground level. Over in Westlake and Sulphur, same kind of situation, looking at values greater than 3 feet in much of Westlake, greater than 6 feet in large sections of Sulphur. So big water values associated with this. And even up here further to the north, this is Moss Bluff on the edge of the map. This is, what's the name of that river again, Donovan? Oh, Calcasieu River, the West Fork, associated with the flooding that backs up across Southwest Louisiana. You can see where it backs up all across that area as well. This is category 4, category 5, just huge numbers. A category 5 is just incredible numbers. This is greater than 9 feet, indicated by red. Much of Southwest Louisiana is under 9 feet of water, worst case scenarios of category 5 hurricanes. Now, this is a different map. This is showing the area for Southeast Texas. This is Beaumont in this area here. Here's the I-10 corridor, kind of going closer to the coast. You notice the Hatchton area down here. This is actually associated with the levee system that's down around the Port Arthur area. So we don't see a storm surge value associated with that because there's a lot of other factors that go into the water topping over the top of a levee system. So from the perspective of this graphic, we're not going to see any water values inside of the levee system. So real time during a real event, we'll have to be figuring out exactly how deep the water potentially would be overtopping the levee, how quickly it is, and how much water could be filling up in behind it. That's the kind of stuff that we're working on during Hurricane Ike when we were forecasting a 15 to 20 foot storm surge. And we knew that that potentially was going to have over 5 feet of water topping the levee system in Port Arthur, causing big problems. So for Category 1 in Southeast Texas, very similar to Southwest Louisiana, the blue shades are indicating water up to 3 feet above ground level. So really the main problem areas when you're looking at this map here is going to be people that live along Sabine River, the Neches River, and then Cow Bayou and other small bayous associated in Southeast Texas that drain into the Gulf of Mexico. So going up the Neches River, the East Bank in Orange County, that's the spot that's much more vulnerable than the West Bank. We got a very high bank in downtown Beaumont, not so much in Rose City. Rose City starts to even see problems from even a Category 1 hurricane, or they could see up to 3 feet of water just from Category 1. Even in some portions of Bridge City, we could see some spots you can see in the map here, or even starting to see some shades of yellow, which is greater than 3 feet of water possibilities in the outer limits of Bridge City, the places that are closer to the side of Sabine Lake. Now watch the change from Category 1 here to Category 2. Basically gets higher values, backing up all the rivers and the associated tributaries. And you can see much larger values. Now Bridge City's values are anywhere from that 3 foot level indicated by the blues to as much as greater than 9 feet indicated by the reds. And also just up bumping into Category 2, now we see water in downtown Orange and all sorts of areas in that area as well. You know, this Category 2 scenario isn't quite too far off what we saw during Hurricane Ike. Ike, of course, making landfall further to our west and southwest, but yet create a big storm surge in Southeast Texas. And this is not too far off of a graphic to indicate some of the water level depths that we saw across Southeast Texas. This is Category 3, just greater and greater values. There is a little bit of a ridge along Highway 69 going from mid-county up towards Beaumont, but that area there, after we get out of a Category 3, potentially can get water even in that area backing up in Category 4 and Category 5. I mean, the bottom line is if we see a Category 5 at landfall across Southeast Texas or Southwest Louisiana, it would be a devastating event for every home and business across the region. And it's the kind of thing that I wouldn't be surprised if it's not inhabitable for, if not weeks, if not for months. So this is just a picture here showing some of the storm surge problems that we had downtown Cameron. You know, this is a courthouse in Cameron where people evacuated to during Hurricane Audrey in '57, and the ones that were lucky enough to make it in there survived the storm, and we lost hundreds of people, probably over 500 people in Lower Cameron Parish from the storm surge associated with Hurricane Audrey. So it was a bad deal in '57. Fortunately, the good news in 2005 with Hurricane Rita, we only had one fatality associated with a storm surge across our region, and that was not down in Lower Cameron. It was actually in Calcasieu Parish, where there was a man that stayed with a shrimp boat, and when a shrimp boat sunk in the ship channel, he went down with it. So that was the one fatality, unfortunately, that we did have associated with Hurricane Rita, associated with storm surge. All right, the next threat here we're going to talk about is tornadoes. We had probably, who knows, hundreds of tornadoes associated with Hurricane Rita between the Beaumont, Lake Charles area. Too many to even number. In fact, you know, because of the situation of what was going on, a lot of times we have these vortices that drop down in the eye wall of a hurricane and produce tornado-like damage all across the area. So I'm not going to be talking about the devastating damage associated with the eye wall of a hurricane. The focus here I wanted to talk about is that tornadoes can occur hundreds of miles away from where the landfall is occurring. My map in the top left here shows the tornado reports the day of landfall. While Audrey was making landfall in Southwest Louisiana on Saturday, September 24th, we were seeing tornadoes dropping in Northeast Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. The day after landfall on Sunday the 25th, more tornado reports across Mississippi, Alabama, and portions of Tennessee. So what we're saying here is we don't need to have a hurricane or tropical storm making landfall locally for us to have a problem with tornadoes. Potentially we could have a hurricane making landfall down in Corpus Christi or even Brownsville, and we could see tornadoes across portions of Southeast Texas and Southwest Louisiana. Now, one of the things that we do in our weather business is we do a lot of weather briefings to the local elected officials and the elected officials and emergency managers to let them know what kind of weather hazards we're expecting for their specific county or parish. And so this is just an example for the 6 counties that we forecast for in Southeast Texas, a table that we would do as it's approaching landfall to fill in the blanks of what kind of wind speeds would we expect for each individual county, the tornado threat, the value of storm surge, and the heavy rain threat. So we would fill in numbers here that we would be issuing in our hurricane local statement, and we would be putting it in a tabular format so that people can rip and read basically and see what the threat is for their local area. In the past, I've done these weather briefings for the local elected officials and emergency managers, and that was kind of the end of it. What we're going to be doing in future events is, after I do this briefing to the local officials, we're going to make the presentation available to the public. So I'm going to re-record this information in a very brief 5-minute or less slideshow to talk about what the problems are expected across our region. That's going to be available on our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and you search NWS Lake Charles, bookmark that page, and that's going to be the spot where we'll be putting our weather briefings during tropical events on that site there. We also will put other briefings throughout the year of other situations. Like for instance, this week here, Donald Jones, our media expert here at Lake Charles, he's been putting together for the last several years some very nice presentations where he's gone out in the community, had meteorologists interviewed to talk about the different hazards associated with hurricanes. And so all of that is available actually right now on our YouTube channel. So once again, go to YouTube, look up NWS Lake Charles, and you can see all that information on there. This is just a table for different parts of the state that we forecast for. This is over in our Acadiana area, Acadia, Evangeline, Iberia, Lafayette, etc., talking about the threats for the individual parishes over there in south central Louisiana, as well as for the parishes down here in southwest Louisiana. Now, the last couple slides that we're going to talk about are some of the changes from the Hurricane Center perspective of things that they're going to be doing slightly differently this year from previous years. The first slide that we're looking at here is the Tropical Weather Outlook. It's a great product that the Hurricane Center has been putting out for several years now, and it's basically highlighting areas across the Atlantic, the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, areas that they think potentially a tropical system could develop within the next 5 days. So in this case here, there's a shaded area of yellow in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Western Caribbean is shaded in orange, and then a couple spots out in the Atlantic shaded in red. Well, these color codes are associated with the probability that the system could potentially develop. So the threat for a low probability of an event occurring, less than 40%, would be shaded in yellow. Medium would be shaded in orange, between 40 and 60%. And if it's higher than 60%, it'll be shaded in red to indicate high probability of the system developing into a tropical system. And so this is going to be a tweak that the Hurricane Center is doing. You can see the values were slightly lower last year associated with that. So this is just going to be a slight tweak to the product in terms of what we're going to be seeing. But the point of this slide is really that we want to get this information out to the community. This is updated 4 times a day by the National Hurricane Center forecasters to give people an idea of, hey, there might be something developing later on in the week in the Caribbean or in the Gulf of Mexico. All right, another thing that the Hurricane Center does, they issue a public advisory every 6 hours as there's a tropical storm or hurricane out there. As the hurricane is approaching landfall, they used to issue a updated advisory every 2 hours. Well, they're kind of tweaking things this year, and they're going to be issuing it every 3 hours when a hurricane or tropical storm watch or warning is in effect. So basically, as the storm is approaching landfall, we're seeing it on the radars. This is an example of Hurricane Ike here. As the storm's approaching the coastline, the Hurricane Center is going to be issuing an updated public advisory every 3 hours. In between those hours, they're going to be issuing a very brief, basically a paragraph or two statement giving you an hour-by-hour update on where the hurricane reconnaissance plane is showing the storm is located, how fast it's moving, how strong the winds are, to give you a quick hour-by-hour update. So basically, this is a timeline that we're looking at on here, showing the full forecast package comes out at 4 and 10. That's both AM and PM and Central Daylight Time. And then we get the updated advisories at 7 and 1, AM and PM every day. In between those hours, like I said, as the hurricane is making landfall, the last 24 to 48 hours, they'll be issuing an hourly tropical cyclone update in between hours. So every hour, there's going to be something coming from the Hurricane Center to provide guidance to the local weather service offices to give you the value-added information that we all need. All right, so this is the big one that Don was alluding to earlier. It's a prototype, experimental storm surge watch and warning product that's going to be starting this year. So this is going to be going out for events where potentially there could be life-threatening storm surge across the region. This is just an example of an imaginary system showing the threat for anywhere from the Texas state line all across Louisiana, all the way towards the Florida panhandle. And so there's different color codes on here. A watch will be shaded in this what I guess you would call light pink, purple shade, and then the bright pink shade is going to be indicating the warnings. And it's not something that's going to be just along the immediate coast. This can go inland. For our area locally, this could go all the way up to the I-10 corridor for those strong hurricanes when we see life-threatening storm surge being a problem all the way up to the I-10 corridor. So this is going to be a product that's collaborated between the National Hurricane Center and the meteorologists here at the National Weather Service in Lake Charles for our local area. And same thing with all the other Weather Service offices along the Gulf Coast and the East Coast. This will be a collaborative effort between the local Weather Forecast Office and the National Hurricane Center. The intent of this product here is to highlight areas of possible life-threatening storm surge. And so the timeline of when we're going to start seeing this product is 48 hours before the surge is expected to be in your local area. So that's kind of the key point here, is this is not something that's going to be put out 5 days in advance, as opposed to the tropical weather outlook that we do see that far in advance. This is going to be much closer to within 48 hours of life-threatening storm surge or other hazards that could affect local evacuations. The other product that the Hurricane Center will be issuing is this one here. This is called the Potential Storm Surge Flooding Map. And this is a Ike-like scenario here that they did. Basically, it's going to be showing similar to what we showed earlier, where you can see the worst case scenarios for category 1 through 5. This is going to be a real-time scenario as the systems are approaching landfall to show where potentially areas could get flooded. And so same kind of color scheme that we talked about earlier. The blue is going to indicate water up to 3 feet above ground level. The yellow is over 3 feet, orange over 6 feet, red over 9 feet. So that's going to be the graphic that the Hurricane Center is going to be working at. This is going to be something that's going to be coming out, though, 60 to 90 minutes after the Hurricane Center advisories. So we talked earlier that advisory comes out at 10 and 4 a.m. and p.m. This product is going to be coming out hour to an hour and a half after the fact. So this is something to be watching for. We'll, of course, put links on our website when the Hurricane Center has these available as the storm is approaching the coast. And so I've created a little table here to kind of highlight what the purpose of the prototype storm surge watch warning is versus the potential storm surge flooding map. The audience, primary audience, I should say, for the storm surge watch warning is for you, the public. When the local elected officials make that decision to call for evacuations, typically they're doing that for one of two reasons. Either A, they're expecting the water to be so deep that it could kill you where you're staying, or B, they're expecting the winds to be so strong that they think you have the potential of a large loss of life even from the winds. So this is going to be life-threatening storm surge, the storm surge watch warning. So it's not going to show a value of a number. It's just going to be saying this is the zone, this is the area of the region that potentially could have life-threatening storm surge. And the area is determined by meteorologists, by people at the Hurricane Center, as well as local offices like here in Lake Charles. So there's a lot of continuity from one forecast advisory to the next. On the other hand, the storm surge flooding map is a little bit different. The decision makers in the community, that's who the primary audience that's intended for. That's going to be for the elected officials. It could be for even business leaders to determine what they got to do locally for their facilities before the storm comes in. And so this is going to be a graphical picture that shows an actual value of how high the water could be above ground level. And so this forecast is going to be determined by the latest Hurricane Center advisory. So there could potentially be a swing of those values from one advisory to the next as a forecast shifts across the Gulf Coast, as it intensifies or weakens, just the variances that you see in a typical Hurricane Center, or which is a typical hurricane forecast that comes out. The last couple slides here is just some updates from the Hurricane Center showing the forecast verification. And so what we're looking at here, the red line indicates the one-day forecast error. Green line is a 2-day forecast error. Yellow is 3 days, 4 days in brown, 5 days in blue. So you can say day 4 and day 5, that just started in the early 2000s. So we've only got about 15 years worth of data on that. We are going back to 1990 to show the general trend where we've seen improvement in the forecast in the last 20 plus years. So you think about, when is the decision to evacuate being made? Typically that's between day 2 and day 3 before the storm makes landfall. So back in 1990, the 2-day forecast error was 200 miles. The 3-day forecast error was over 300 miles. Today, those values are much lower. You can see that a 2-day error is on the order of 75 miles. A 3-day error is on the order of 100 miles. So we've seen improvement, and that's good, but there's obviously, even with a 100-mile error for a 3-day forecast, there's going to be times where local decision makers make the call for evacuations, and the storm ends up shifting 100 miles away on average, and you end up having no problems associated with the system. So that's just something to be aware of, that there is an error associated with forecasts when it comes to hurricanes and tropical storms. This graph here just shows it basically decade by decade. So 1970s is indicated by the blue line. The green line is the 1980s. The 90s indicated by yellow. The first 10 years of the 2000s by red, and the last 5 years in the black line in the bottom. So you can see a gradual improvement of the forecasting of the track by the National Hurricane Center for systems over a 5-day period. Now, when you break it down from a tropical storm to a hurricane, it's kind of interesting to see there's a little bit of a twist to this. In general, it's much more difficult to have an accurate forecast with a tropical storm compared to a hurricane. And I think it's probably just because of the fact that tropical storms can be sloppy, messy, they can be very easily influenced by where thunderstorms develop and be pulled, left and right of a forecast track. Whereas a large, mature hurricane is a little bit easier, not easier to forecast, but it's a little bit more of a steady forecast where you can see the changes in a more continuous perspective. So what we're looking at here for a weak tropical storm, a 1-day forecast error is about 50 miles. Whereas a hurricane, a 1-day forecast error for hurricanes is closer to 30 miles. So that's a fairly significant change from a tropical storm of 50 miles, a hurricane 30 miles. And it really expands when you look at day 3. The day 3 for a weak tropical storm is almost 150-mile error compared to a hurricane, which is closer to 90 miles off. So, with all being said and done, there is obviously a much better forecast coming out associated with hurricanes versus tropical storms, just because of the structure of the system. The stronger they are, the more well-behaved in general that they act out there. The last slide on here is the intensity forecast of tropical systems in the last 20 plus years, 25 years. And same color schemes here. The red line is the 1-day forecast error. Green is day 2, day 3 in yellow, day 4 in brown, day 5 in blue. And you can see in general, there was not a lot of significant statistical improvement for the 90s and the first 10 years of the 2000s. But you look here at the end of the table, you notice in the last 5 years, we're starting to see a downward trend and improvement in the intensity forecast. And so that's good news to see. I think a lot of it has to do with just the technology changes that we've seen in the National Weather Service. When me and Donovan first joined the Weather Service in the early 90s, the computer systems that we use at the offices as well, national centers, are super slow compared to what we're using today. Much faster systems today compared to what we have. So I think it's improvements in technology. The fact that we've gone through so many tropical systems over the last 20 plus years, I think going through more events will also show improvement in forecasts as well. And so that's my last slide. The last slide here is just the forecast that Dominic showed earlier, and he'd already mentioned the fact that the reasons for the overall numbers to be quieter than normal is associated with the cooler water temperatures, below normal water temperatures in the tropical Atlantic, in the El Nino, where we get the warmer waters in the Pacific near the equator. It kind of adjusts the wind flow pattern across the Gulf Coast, and it tends to create fewer systems in the big picture of things. But the important thing to remember is that even in quiet seasons, we're still talking about possibly 6 to 11 systems. And if one of those ends up coming to us, it's not a quiet season, it's a busy season. And any of those hazards that we're talking about, the tornadoes, the wind threat, the fresh flooding threat, and the storm surge, any of those are a factor for whoever ends up being possibly hit by a system. So it's important for us to be aware of all these different hazards. We're going to be doing our best to express the different hazards and the threats associated with them for all these systems as they come into our local area. So now Donovan come back up here, and we're going to see what kind of questions we got. Then I'll watch the internet for us, and we've got for us.
Our first question is, what are the chances of us getting hit by a hurricane this year?
The question is, what are our chances of being hit by a hurricane this year? One thing we average about 1 every 2 years in the state of Louisiana. I think Texas is about 1 every 3 to 4 years as well. Since we haven't had a hurricane rainfall since 2000,
each system as it goes along. 2005 was the exception rate. Unnormal, we had 3 systems hit the state. The rare is 2008, so we just off from that.
What was the strongest hurricane
In the United States, the strongest hurricane, I think they say it has to be the regular storm in 1935 if you look at Celsius, the rainfall. But probably the strongest rain is Hurricane Preparedness in 1969.
Okay, Roger, what's the difference between a tropical storm and an extratropical storm?
That's a tricky question, and boy, they cannot get confusing when it comes to watching that on TV. You know, basically, tropical event is what we consider a warm core system. And when we say warm core, basically the eye wall of a tropical system. If you flew the airplane through it, if you launched a weather balloon through it, you would notice that the temperatures are much warmer than the surrounding environment associated with it. Extratropical is totally different. The temperature actually typically are cooler than that. And extratropical events are what we typically see during the wintertime across all across the United States. The big nor'easters that we see off the East Coast every winter, those are actually extratropical systems that we're monitoring and watch as they go up the East Coast.
All right. Last question. Can I have a hurricane named after me?
You know, that's an interesting question. The question was, can you have a hurricane named after you? You know, we started this back in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And, you know, it originally started with a bunch of women names, and it's progressed where in the 70s we added men's names, and it alternates men, women names. It alternates American names versus French names versus Spanish or Hispanic names. And so there's a lot of different names out there. And, you know, a name will get retired if it's a hurricane or tropical system that causes a lot of damage, fatalities, and stuff like that. So like, of course, Rita, Katrina, those storms are retired, and they had to come up with a new name. Well, you know, coming up with a new name, basically the Hurricane Center, other parts of the World Meteorological Organization get together, talk about potential replacement names for the K storm, for the R storm, and they work on that. I suppose, you know, it's kind of interesting. I suppose someone could give us a suggestion and we could email it down to the Hurricane Center, and you never know, possibility we could get that name on the list for you somewhere down the road. But it's a 6-year list, right?
Yeah, the 6-year list was started in 1979 to include both female and male names, and pretty much every 6 years. And we're actually on the first list again that started in '79, although half of those names have been retired by now.
Okay. Well, you know, thank you for listening to our presentation tonight. You know, this is, you know, kind of a first for us to try a hurricane briefing for the local communities across Southeast Texas and Southwest Louisiana. And I hope you were interested in it. It'll be available on our YouTube channel after this live event here for people to go back and review. If you have any questions, you can contact us on the YouTube channel. Donald Jones will be able to answer your questions down the road with that. So thanks again for tuning in to us tonight.